David Shulz. David, I really appreciate you being here tonight. I'm looking forward to your scratch building of your passenger fleet. I've really been looking forward to this. So welcome, and I'll turn it over to you, sir.
All right. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate having the opportunity to show off some of my skills. I will hand this over to my photographer tonight. You probably recognize him. He's been on here a couple of times. You're turned around?
Yep.
All right. Now. Very good. Well, I figured I'd start with what I started was simple. I started with Lionel trains, and then I met Bill Flint and Bob Chellen, and they turned me into O-scale because I love building things, and there wasn't much to build in Lionel. So, of course, the first thing I started with was kits. And this was a little Northwest short line kit of an NP caboose that I built. So, I started by putting an interior in the caboose because I thought I'd take it to the next level. In fact, if you can see down in here, I'll use my little pointer. There's eggs in the fry pan and a little coffee pot on here, along with the plates and cups. So that's, it was my first attempt at doing this. Actually, the first attempts got sold. And then this was the final one that I was happy with. So I kept this one on hand. So next we go into the scratch or the kit bashing portion that I went into. Now, this is a Williams shell of a Trainmaster. And I didn't really have much use for a Trainmaster, but I could use an H1044. So I chopped it down. The car bodies tend to be a little too wide. The walkway is a little too narrow. So I basically cut this down, narrowed all the parts, and then put it back together into a model of an H1044 that eventually I will finish. But that started off when you're on a HO budget in O scale, you have to do stuff like this because you could buy these for about $10 back in the day. And then you scratch build or you kit bash into what you really need. So, and then from there, we moved into our passenger. Now, the first passenger cars I ever built, I made the floors. And that is an effort and futility. I finally found a source for these floors. They come from the Indianapolis Car Company. It went out of business years ago, but he made a lot of this stuff. And I was able to find these, guy in Chicago had them, and I bought them for $10 each. And it's a lot simpler than gluing all these little pieces on a flat piece of plastic. So that's how I started switching to that. And then we'll show the passenger cars. Now, this is a model of a Northern Pacific coach that they purchased in the 60s. It's modeled after a Chicago Northwestern coach. The NP had borrowed some Northwestern coaches and then bought a few of them from the Northwestern when they were downsizing their trains. And the NP was so impressed with these style of cars that they bought a few of their own. This car is one that the Duluth Museum happens to own, which is the 517, which was originally Northern Pacific. So you can see how I laminate 2 sheets of plastic together, 20 thousandths, and I use super glue to laminate together. And I find that when I use super glue, it doesn't tend to warp. When I use the plastic cement, things will warp over time. This car is about 5 years old already. Shows you how slow I am. But you just laminate the plastic together, and then I would cut the windows out. And I have kind of a unique way I would do the windows. I have that book by Charles Riddisell on NP passenger cars. So I would draw out the sides. And then what I will do first is I'll take the nibbler that I get from Micromark. You poke a hole in the middle, and then you would take the nibbler and start cutting away at the window. And then I made these little blocks. Now this one's probably too big. This is for bigger windows. So I'll use my other one. I make these little blocks, and I round the edge. I square them up in my true sander, and I round the edge. And then I use self-adhesive sandpaper. And then what I can do is after I got the hole roughed out, I slide these in here like so. And then you just start sanding, start doing, this number here till you square them up. And then you can flip it around to do the other. And on this car, this was, there's a lot of windows on this car. So that was one of the projects I took to the hotel with me and worked on it for hours, truing up all the windows in this thing. And then the next part of scratch building the car is you got to start building the interior, of course. So what I would do is the first car I ever built, I did the entire floor in one piece. And then using the book, I would draw on the floor what went where, the walls and such. Well, the problem was trying to pull that whole thing out. So now what I do is I'll use one piece and then I'll strategically cut it in areas. And that way you can drop the pieces into place. And they're easy to remove. If you ever need to remove them to add more detail, they're easy to pull out and to add your extra detail to it. Then the coach seats, of course, will go in the middle here. That'll just be one piece with all the seats attached to it. So that's how I went from that. And then I'll show you some of my completed cars. Let's see. This was the very first one I built. That's an NP 10.6 sleeper. The NP only ever had 2 of these cars. They originally bought them to go with the Lark on the Southern Pacific out of Portland. And most of their years, they were painted in the Lark paint scheme, which I think was like a 2-tone gray. And they were in the SP colors, but they were lettered Northern Pacific. Well, I think it was 62 or 63, the SP gave them back to the Northern Pacific and said we don't need them. So they painted them in the 2-tone green. And I'm not really sure. I trust they used them as kind of replacement cars when they had to be in the other cars were in the shop. So, but anyway, this one, all the stuff is glued in the car. And that's when I discovered, well, this isn't going to work in the future if I ever need to take them out for some reason. And that's when I started making the interiors removable. But these cars also have microscope slides for windows. I've learned how to cut the glass and put them in there. And that way I don't have the problem with scratching or the windows turning yellow over the years. And then I glued file type paper on there to simulate the window shades. So that was that car. And then we move on. Put this one, right?
Dave, I got to ask you, what's your secret to cutting the glass?
Well, I'll tell you, Jim, I'll show you what I do. I can just do a real quick demonstration. Oops. It's not really hard. It took me a while to learn how to do this. But what I will do is I will use a dial caliper to measure the opening. And then I discovered if I add 30 thousandths to that dial caliper and then hold it, in fact, where's my caliper at here? What I will do is I will measure the opening on the car. So we'll just take this one as a rough estimate. So there we have 880. So what I will do is add 30 thousandths to that, and that adjusts for the tip of the diamond cutter. And what I'll do is take the microscope slide and I'll put the dial caliper in here. Now the trick that I learned was that if you press really hard on the diamond scribe, it'll scratch the glass pretty heavily, but then it won't break properly. So the trick was to just lightly slide it across the glass, where you just get, and you won't be able to see it, but it's a very light line, and then it'll snap right on there. Now that will be perfect this way, as you can see. And then what I do is I measure the other direction and cut it the other way, same way. And then I bought those little diamond burrs from Micromark again, and I'll put them in the Dremel, dip the glass in water, and then round the edges to fit in the window or fit in the cutout. But you just round the edges. And amazingly enough, with those diamond burrs, it doesn't take a lot of effort to do that, but you got to keep the tip cool. Otherwise the glass will start to shard and break. But pretty simple technique. But the real trick was just lightly scratch the glass. You don't want to press hard.
I'll be darned.
Yeah, like I say, I fought it for the longest time. I kept getting moon breaks and everything else. And I was watching a glass cutter one time, and he was just lightly scratching the glass, and it would snap right on that scratch line. I thought, okay, maybe I'm just pushing too hard. So anyway, you can buy these microscope slides on eBay for a couple dollars a box, and you get like 100. Well, each box has got 72 slides in it. So
I don't know if this company is around yet. But...
Oh, I don't know if they are anymore. Anyway, if you look on eBay, you can find all kinds of microscope slides. And then lately, for like, well, a little off subject, but what the heck? This engine here I'm doing for a friend, these sliding windows on this engine are done with what do you call them? Slip glass. It's what, when you put a sample on the microscope slide, you'd cover it with these cover glasses, and they are ultra thin. And that is really, you'd really lightly touch that, but they cut just as easily as the other. But I got these included with the microscope sides. So these side windows and the little vent window here are covered in these slip covers.
Huh.
But same trick, you can use a little emery cloth to round the edges, or you can use the little diamond burrs to put a little bit of a curve to it. Works slicker than all get out. And then the headlight here, I just took a piece of glass and then I would just sit there and grind around and around little by little until it would fit in that opening. So that's actual microscope slide in there also. And then I use the old the canopy glue from the remote airplane people. And you can see it's a little sloppy here, but now after this dries, I'll take a wet Q-tip and just go around, and that'll come right off the glass easily, and it'll clean up like this one here is now. So I've learned to use microscope slides and all this stuff, and it's kind of amazing. So anyway, that's the quick course on that kind of nonsense.
And you're just barely touching the glass.
Yeah, you just almost the weight of the scribe is about all you need. You don't have to push hardly at all. And when you do it, you'll see a very light line, and then it'll snap right on that line. And somebody who really knows glass could probably explain why that happens. But if you push hard and put a scratch line in there, then it'll break. You'll get all kinds of weird breaks. But if you just lightly scratch that surface, that's all it takes. And then you put your fingers on either side, and it'll just pop right on that line.
I'll be doing it. Thank you.
Craziest thing I've ever seen. But it works. Like I say, I use microscope slides and all this stuff now. So here's an example of the interior on this. This is a duplex sleeper that I made. And you can remove each of the parts out of this thing. So take the one end. Oh. So if I ever need to redo this or update it, it's pretty easy to remove all the pieces out of the car. So then you just have the bare bones car, and then you can drop the pieces in. I started using printed paper for the flooring in these cars, and you can get all kinds of different carpet patterns. And here's like a tile floor that I printed off on this end of the car. I've got some sheets here. I'm building some commuter cars, and I'll show you those here in a little bit.
Have you ever looked into 3D printing for these components?
You know, I have a friend, once again, on these commuter cars. I'll show you a couple of parts he 3D printed for me. But, you know, I enter a lot of this stuff in NMRA contests. And of course, I think they just ruled that a 3D part is not a scratch built part. So, you know, if you use too much 3D printing in the cars, you're probably going to lose points on the scratch build again. So I kind of like to keep my skills honed and scratch build all this stuff. But sometimes it gets to be a little too much. When you're building 15 cars, it's like, you know what? I'm not making 15 bathrooms. So sometimes, yeah, you just give it up and go with the 3D printed part. But I do have a friend in town who will print parts, and I'll show you some of that here in a little bit on these commuter cars. But anyway, that's how those just fit back in. So at any time you want to upgrade the car, you can just pull the parts out, and you know, if things improve, you want, you know, better parts or whatever, you can pull out the old parts, stick in the new. All right. This next car has kind of a fun story to it. And that's Columbia here. This is my diner of an SP&S diner, Columbia. The actual car was on its way to the scrapyard in Saskatchewan. And it got to Alexandria, Minnesota, which at the time, that's where I lived. And the story I had heard was that the brakes locked up on it and they slid the wheels. So the crew set it out in Alexandria. Well, BN came up, assessed the problem, and decided to sell it right on site and not even bother with it. And they took sealed bids, and a local restaurant in town ended up buying the car and moving it out to their restaurant. Unfortunately, today the car is still sitting there, but they've totally gutted the car. All of the underbody stuff is gone. The only thing that's left is the actual shell of the car. So it's an empty tube and the trucks, but they got like 8-inch flat spots on those wheels. They offered it to the museum here in Duluth, and they went down and took a look at it and just determined that so much of the stuff was gone. It would be too costly to restore. So I thought, you know what, I need to make a tribute car to that car. So we made this SP&S diner, and James decided to build a Milwaukee Road diner. And so we kind of went head to head on this one, and we entered him in the contest in Chicago. And after much ado, James beat me by 1 point. I got 120, he got 121, and he hasn't let me forget it yet.
Why would I?
Yeah. So, but I even have pictures of Jim Hill on the end of the car. I don't know if you'll be able to see that or not. Oh, where's my pointer? Here. There's Jim Hill in that part of the car. Here's his son, Louis Hill, in this one portrait here. And once again, we can take out the parts to show off the kitchen. So we have the coffee urn here. We got some pots on the stove. We got the grill on the end here, the sinks. And they've even got knives hanging on the wall here. You can see the little knives hanging on the wall along with the sinks. And then one other little bit of history on this car, which is kind of interesting. This painting here of Mount St. Helens was done by my wife's great uncle, I think it was. And my son, Michael, was able to shrink that down, the painting. We took a picture of the painting, we shrunk it way down, and I've got it hanging on the wall here on Columbia. So I thought that was kind of funny to have a picture from a relative that had been painted. But has this car got this car here has, when you're building pasture cars, you know, it's hard to get between them to uncouple them. So one of the little tricks we did is we actually have removable diaphragms. There's 4 magnets on here, little rare earth magnets, and then there's 4 magnets on here. And so if you want, you can pull the diaphragms out, uncouple the car, and then you simply bring the diaphragm back and it snaps back into place. So I'm retrofitting all my cars now with the snap-on diaphragms because that's pretty slick for uncoupling. All right. That is Columbia.
I know we have some questions via the chat, but I'm kind of missing them.
Oh, okay.
Let's see here. Questions via chat. Besides Clark, yeah. Okay. Says we ought to double the pay of the cameraman.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Clark put in here about the steric carbide scribe.
Yes.
The pocket one and another one. And then somebody put here about working in a glass shop. And you're right on about that light touch.
Oh, the light scribe, yeah. Yeah, this was a little diamond one that was at Micromark. I don't remember, I paid $8 or $10 for it years ago. And it just got a little piece of diamond in the end. And like I say, it doesn't take much. You just lightly scribe that glass, and amazingly enough, it'll snap right along that line. But if you try to, I mean, the first time I was going back and forth, and then when I break it, you'd get this big moon break. And it was like, what am I doing wrong? So watching that glass cutter one time.
Cohen has a question.
Okay.
Do you work from plans or only from photographs?
No, I worked with the Charles Vizitlo book, is a book that he put out years and years ago on Northern Pacific, Great Northern, SP&S, and Burlington car. Big thick book. They're about $150 to buy now. But in there, all the plans, conveniently enough, are O-scale plans. So it makes it very easy for somebody like me. I'll lay the floor out right alongside the actual blueprint, and then I can draw in the lines, what goes where, the seat centers, where the walls would go, where the bathrooms are, where the toilets are located. It makes it very easy. And I'll draw on the flooring where all this stuff goes. So when I'm building, I can just look at the floor plan right on what I've drawn on the plastic. and then just put the walls in, put the bathrooms in, all the detail parts. So that's what I use is that book to draw out all my plans.
Dan, let's see here. Ted Becker asked, what do you use for the roofs?
The roofs are actually, I cheated when I said I scratch build everything. The roofs are American Standard roofs. American Standard used to build passenger car kits years ago, and I buy roofs whenever I can find them. Sometimes I have to buy the whole kit, and then I'll put my own sides on. I'll put my own details to the flooring. I'll usually sell off the sides, the detail parts, because the NP is stuff totally different. The trucks, of course, are Chemtron trucks, because the NP was a huge user of the outside swing hanger. Their older cars had the 41Ns, which had an inside swing hanger, but you always have to pull the truck out to rebush those swing hangers. When we're on the outside swing hanger, you can just put the bushing, you take the weight off the car, you can put the bushings in without removing the truck. So the NP went to those outside swing hangers pretty early on in their career.
From YouTube, Barb Butcher.
Yeah.
How do you install the windows? So I guess she's asking, once you get them all cut, how do you get them in? Make them stay in?
What I do is they're basically press fit at that point. If my openings end up being pretty accurate, but I do double check every window that I put in. I'll double check to make sure. I'll slide the window in, and sometimes you got to trim the plastic a little bit or whatever. But then what I'll use is that canopy glue again. I'll put a coating around the outside edge of it, slide into place, and I'm not worried about getting fingerprints on it. When the glue dries, I'll take a wet Q-tip and then go around and clean the glass. And the canopy glue will actually fill in little slight variations that I may have missed, and it dries clear. And they look really good that way. But that's how I install the windows. They're almost literally a press fit into and then they're flush. Now, one of the things I'm thinking about doing with the 3D printer is having the gasket made for the outside of the windows. I think that would take it to the next level if they could actually print like that rubber gasket that you see on the outside of the windows. Just spray those black and glue them on over the top of the windows. I think that'd be pretty cool stuff. But as of right now, it's the way they are. I don't have a gasket in there. And eventually they'll probably have a technology where that'll be readily available. They can print hundreds of them, and I'll be able to put those on all my cars.
Now I had a question.
Okay.
When you were showing the one of the underframes or the semi-completed cars,
Okay.
on the bottom of it, it looked like some white plastic. I guess you build your own bolsters and stuff.
The bolsters are. I know what he's talking about. Oh, okay. The bolsters are scale. They're the old Walthers. Old Walthers. They're primed, but they're the old Walthers bolsters. And this one here is modified. I modified this to hold a Katy coupler, and then I actually made a mold of it so that I don't have to keep modifying these metal pieces. It's kind of cheating because I don't steal stuff from other people, but this took so much work to modify this that I made a mold of that one part that I had heavily modified. This piece I still buy. It's a lead part that you get, or white metal, and I use those, and it adds weight to the car. I like to use the metal parts as much as possible because I like to get my passenger cars up there around 2.5 to 3 pounds each. So that's what those white parts are. This is the molded piece. These I actually buy from Scale City at. So that's what's going on there. All right, next. Well, I guess what we'll do here then is I'll go to the pièce de résistance. This was the car that I made for the last time I was in Chicago. And this is kind of not an unusual car, but it's an interesting car. And I had a lot of people doubt that this really existed because they've never heard of an RPO and a dormitory being combined on a train. Normally, most railroads used to run just an RPO, and then the dormitory car was separate. Well, the NP, of course, didn't need, on the North Coast Limited, they apparently didn't need a lot of mailroom. So the mailroom was only 30 feet wide or long. And then the rest of the car, they made into a dormitory for their employees. So, but you know, bunks in every bed, just a couple showers on this end. And then once again, I'm using the printed flooring from just a computer printout that my son Michael likes to do that for me. He'll find different floorings and such. And I wanted a black and white tile for the employee section. And the wood floor on this end, on the RPO end, was kind of fascinating. I used actual lumber, and I took some pictures of the RPO section at the museum. And the floor had kind of an orangish tint to it. So I thought, well, all right. So I took the flooring and I took some Milwaukee Road paint and I diluted it way down into a stain. And I just kind of ran it over the boards and it gave it that orange look to it. Well, then I used to glue it inside the car here. I used JB Weld, and I would put a thin layer of JB Weld on the board and then put it in place and press down. Well, all of a sudden it's oozing up between the boards and I was just frustrated with it. So I'm taking my finger and wiping it out of there. And I noticed that it was leaving gray streaks on the floor. And I started looking at that and I thought, that is turning out fantastic. So instead of, I figured I would sand it to get rid of the gray. And after I got done with it, I thought that looks better than any floor I've ever put in. The letters on the table, my son Michael once again found a website with RPO canceled letters, and he copied probably 50 of those and shrunk them down to O scale. And then he has access to a very high dollar printer, and he printed off these letters. You can't, with the naked eye, you can't read them, but if you use a jeweler's loop, you can actually read the addresses on all those letters. So I thought that was pretty fantastic. But I made the pigeonholes on this car are little brass tubes, square tubing that I stacked up, soldered together, and then I machined off in my mill. And so you get all the pigeonholes, and then you have the package area. You got the tables where the mail was sorted, and all of that is built out of brass and scratch built. This is plastic, but the tables down there below are all scratch built from brass. And then the mail bags are in there. You can see them probably this way. You can see the little mail sacks in the rack.
I'll be darned.
So, and then these are, and once again, I don't know if I have any of this stuff laying around handy here, but this material here is the foil wrap from like Marlboro hard packs. Working on the railroad, about half the people there smoke, and they're always throwing those hard packs in the garbage, and I'm always digging them out of the garbage and ripping the foil out of them, because I find that stuff really handy. It's silver on one side, so you can use it like diamond tread plate on one side, and the other side is a paper that's textured. Well, I find it works perfect for tablecloths, for mail sacks, for anything you want. I use in one of the cars, it's the antimacassars on the seats. You just lightly touch them up with a little bit of a dull white or whatever color you need. So the mail sacks are that foil paper from those cigarette packs. It's rather amazing stuff. I use it all the time. The shower curtains are that paper. So. Anyway, that was my grandiose piece.
That's magnificent. That is beautiful.
Well, thank you, Sean.
That's
Yeah,
got
I
a
was
whole lot
quite
of,
happy with it.
that's got a whole lot of, as the sausage commercial said, we know it's there.
Yeah, where that really comes into play is under here. You know it's there, but nobody can really see it.
Yeah.
But it's all the works underneath the car. But I love putting in the steam lines, which is basically heavy solder wrapped in masking tape.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like wrapped steam lines. And it's easy to bend, easy to flex around. You can do all kinds of strange things with it. So it makes it real simple to make a steam line out of it. A lot of the wiring I use, I'll take brass and I'll heat it up so that it loses its temper. And then I can wind it together like 3 strands, solder it in certain places, and then use it as cabling around the insides of the car. So then that'll bring us to my latest project. I'll bring it over to the table here. And a couple of people out there are going to know that I'm doing this because they're always catching me working on stuff while I'm watching the Zoom meeting. They're always asking me, what are you doing while you're sitting there watching that? I am building 4 Chicago Northwestern commuter cars. And once again, I took the ICC flooring that I bought, but I had to cut out the middle for the steps. And here's that paper I was talking about that I used for the tread plate. Can you get in on that? I suppose the light might be a little bright there or something. There, that might work better. So these are, I had to modify some American Standard trucks, had to cut off the ears and do a couple of other little modifications to make it look like the Northwestern trucks. These cars here, the plumbing underneath, what I'm going to do is I'm putting wipers on the trucks because I want the lights to light in this car. And what I'm going to do is run it through the plumbing underneath the car here. And then the way I'm going to get it up to the roof is the handrails pass through the bottom here, and I will solder them to these wires. And then the up above in the stairwell area, it'll look like grab irons in the stairwell, but up above there'll be wires going to a decoder, and that will turn the lights on and off. And but I've yet to put the wipers in, but we're getting close with this. But this was a challenge. I'm not normally a Northwestern modeler, but a guy challenged me to build some commuter cars, I think because he wants me to sell them to him. So, and I'm willing to do it, but I love tackling stuff like this. Yeah. So, and I got the sides cut. I used the same technique I used before. Now this is just 20 thousandths so far. And I will laminate some pieces on the inside here to strengthen the side and to make I'm going to try a different technique this time. This is just 20 thousandths thick. This time I'm going to make areas, squared off areas where I can just drop a microscope slide right into the area. And then I won't have to try and press fit all these little windows in here. So we're going to try a little different technique on this one. But I used my little sanding block. Once again, sitting in the hotel, watching terrible TV or whatever, and just sit here and sand these out to get them looking about the same. Now I happen to grab the side for the cab car. I'm going to be making a cab car for this. But anyway, you can see this will fit on here as such. So we'll have the Chicago Northwestern. I chose the Northwestern cars because they were smooth sided. Who wants to build fluted sides? And then we'll grab some of the detailing parts that we're making for this to show off all the goodies that we're doing. And we'll grab an end here, and then I'll just grab one of these stairways. So these are the, I made a mold of these parts. These are the stairways that go up into the upper levels of the car. And once again, who wants to make 15 of those? So I made 4 and got this, I went down to the museum once again, and I measured these up, and I made these molds, the masters for these stairways. And these will mount in the corners of the car like this. And there'll be 4 of them, 1 in each corner, and you'll have the upper area and then the lower area. These are the dividers that go in the middle. These will go in here like this. And then let's see, what else did I have to show off here? Anyway, the flooring. I should be more organized. Anyway, we searched and searched and searched. We finally found this stuff under industrial flooring. And once again, this is just printed off on a computer. And we'll glue these onto the car to make the flooring for the lower section. And it'll also go into the upper section. Once I have this glued down, then I can put in the seats. So
this guy is a superb builder. He's scratch building O-scale passenger cars.
Well, let's see here.
Yeah.
What was I looking for? Yeah, I want, I guess, a couple more of these. So anyway, I was gonna, do I have that mold handy? I thought I did. That doesn't matter. Anyway, I made the mold for these so that I wouldn't have to keep making them all. This is one of the masters. You can see the rubber that was trapped on the steps and such, but the molds turned out very well. So I'm quite pleased with how those turned out, but they'll be just like that. And then of course we have this is the cab car end that I made. Once again, I made these ends. I cut them out. I put the rivets on here. I put receptacles where the marker lights would plug in and such. And then I added and I made a mold of this. So once again, I didn't have to keep making this piece over and over and over again. But these will mount on the end like that. And then of course the sides will go on. And I'm going to be doing something a little different with the car ends this time. I'm going to do the same with my diaphragms on my passenger car. I'm going to have these held on with magnets. There'll be two by the doorways. There'll be two on the ends, maybe a couple more in the middle somewhere. But that way, if you ever want to work on the bottom end of the car, instead of reaching down through, you'll be able to pull the sides off the car, and the magnets should hold it. It'll be a grand experiment to see if it works. But do I have those 3D printed parts handy here? I probably don't. They probably got put away somewhere. Yeah. Anyway, you guys get a good idea of what's going on here with that. So.
David, are your roofs held on with magnets too, or are they just pressed?
You know, they aren't now. They're just kind of press fit on there. But I think in the future, I'm going to use magnets on those also, because eventually I want to put lights in here, and I just haven't really decided how I'm going to do it. Now with these new LEDs, you know, you can buy strips of LEDs, and I think I'm going to go with that. And then I will put magnets in, like 6 magnets on here, rare earth magnets. And that way I can maybe even remove this ledge and just have the roof sit right on there and snap in place. And I think that'll be a fantastic idea. But right now they're just basically set on there. They leave a little bit of a gap in here. But like I say, when I finally put the lights and get it, I'll maybe put the magnets in there, and then the roofs will just snap right on.
What glue do you use to attach the paper flooring to the plastic structure?
The way I do the flooring is the paper, of course, is pretty porous. So what I will do is I will spray it with either dull coat or gloss coat, whichever way you want. If you want shiny floors, spray with gloss coat, but I'll spray both sides. And then what I do is I will take this contact cement, which is used for countertops. It's used for tile floors, all that kind of stuff. And what I will do is put some in these little containers that I keep from the cinnamon rolls that my wife and I love to buy. The icing comes in these. So I'll put a bunch in there, and then I will mix MEK or acetone in there to really loosen it up, make it like watery paint. And I'll take a brush and I'll paint a layer on the car itself, or wherever you want to put the flooring. And then with the dull coat or the gloss coat, you can paint that glue on the paper. You let the two dry and you set the paper in place and press down. But it won't be very thick. And that's the beauty about watering this stuff down. Instead of a real heavy glue, it's a very thin layer of glue. And you put it down on there and you press it. And that's how I held these pieces in place, the foil. That's just using some of the old contact cement and then just pressing them down in place. And it works very well for holding that kind of stuff. But the paper flooring is all held in place with this kind of stuff. Goo is the same thing, but you'd have to use a lot of it. And goo tends to get real thick. But once again, you put acetone in there and stir it up, and it loosens it right up. And that's how I do the flooring on those cars.
What about using the different 3M transfer tapes? You'd have to read the specs to get the right one, but
yeah, I've never tried that. There's probably better ideas than what I'm doing. This is what I've done. I'd be interested in knowing if other people have different techniques, because this might not be the best technique. It's the one I find works. But I've learned so much watching these Zoom meetings. Martin's little trick of mixing goo and super glue together, I'm dying to try that on some wood kit sometime, because I've never thought of mixing the two glues. So I think that would be fantastic to try that out sometime.
I was only thinking about making it really thin.
Sure.
Yeah,
that's what I do with the flooring. So, I water that contact cement way down, and then just use a regular little paintbrush to paint it on there, just like paint. And it ends up being very thin. And then once the two are dry to the touch, basically, you put the two together and rub it down on there, and it's there to stay. It's pretty amazing. And then one other thing that I built, and this was another challenge, was a friend of mine had pictures of a giant boom that went up onto the iron range. And this was built off photographs. I just looked at the pictures and I started cutting things saying, yeah, that looks about right. Yeah, that looks about right. And I built this. I had it originally on a flat car, but we had to remove it off the flat car. The car got damaged. But anyway, this was shipped to Duluth on a 50-foot flat, and the boom is like 75 feet. So they had to have 2 idler flats on either side of it. It's not particularly heavy. It was just a 70-ton flat, and this sat on that flat car. So obviously it didn't weigh more than 70 tons. But this was one of those challenges. He challenged me to build it, and I thought, all right, sucker, you're on. I'll do it. But I made these 2 wheels on the end here on my lathe. I glued plastic together, once again, laminating it with super glue. And then I mounted it to my lathe and I turned those out. And then I cut these little angles out of there, the little cutouts in there. And it took 2 wheels to do it. But anyway, this was just one of those challenges that the guy challenged me to make. And so I whipped it out. Now he challenged me to make the bucket that goes along with this. And he sent me a whole bunch of photographs the other night. And I said, you know, I've got enough to do right now. And then one other little scratch built thing is I'm building a 44 tonner. And then once again, I started this back when I didn't have any money, because I always said I had lots of time. I had very little money. Now it's reversed. Now I don't have as much time anymore. I'm getting older and I've got money, but I still enjoy scratch building. And this is just simply laminated plastic, you know, many sheets of plastic glued together, super glued together. And so it's very stable. And then I made the cab and I made a frame, and I laminated sheets of lead in the frame here. So it's got a little bit of heft to it, but I got to put in the front grills but it should be a fun kit when it's done. And I retire in September. So I think magic's going to start happening here after September.
Now, the 45 tonner, is that the one that had the side rods on it?
No, it's a 44 tonner. Sorry if I said 45. The Northern Pacific, and everything's Northern Pacific in my world. The Northern Pacific used a 44 tonner in Duluth to switch out the passenger trains. And the reason went with 44 ton engine had a contract that said if the locomotive weighs more than 45 tons or more, it has to have an engineer and a fireman. So the NP ordered a 44 ton locomotive and then argued with the union saying you only need an engineer, don't need a fireman now because the engine doesn't weigh 45 tons. And it was a huge court battle. And eventually the NP won because it was like, well, you guys agreed that if it was 45 or more, you have to have a fireman. This engine does not weigh 45 tons. It weighs 44 tons. So that's the story behind that locomotive. So I thought, well, that'll be kind of fun to build that. So that's going to be an NP. And then I found out later on that it was I think it was number 5. And it ended up going to the Midland Continental Railroad, which Bob Chellan is a big fan of. And they had that locomotive for years. It ended up going to Kansas City. And then from there, I think it got scrapped, which is unfortunate. It'd been kind of fun if that could have been at the Duluth Museum, but you know, you can't save it all. So I guess that's the quick rundown on my passenger train and scratch building techniques. Anybody got any more questions? Or
What kind of drive for that 44 tonner?
I've got Q Car Company made some trucks, and I'm gonna see if I can work on that. But otherwise, I will probably go with the Magic Carpets or the I think Northwest Shortline, the new outfit they've got. What do they call those new the new drives they have?
Stanton
drive, something
drive?
like that. I'm going to go with that. That way I don't have to cut holes in the floor. The drives will actually be in the truck. So I will probably use, I've got the Q Car Company side frames, which are good for the GE. And then I will probably outfit them with Magic Carpets or something in that fashion. So is anything anybody wants to see up close or want a better look at? Or
I'll be honest with you, I could sit by your side in your workshop all day and just and just watch you build this stuff. This is a real education, just seeing the way that you approach the art of scratch building.
Here's another little interesting project I built. This was another kit bash type of thing. AHM years ago, back in the 70s, made little 40-foot flat cars. So I took 2 of them. I cut one at the 2/3 mark and I cut another one at the 2/3 mark, and I put the 2 halves together to make a 50-foot car. Now this car is probably 30 years old, and I had an affinity for the Chicago Great Western, so I just lettered it CGW, and then I think I just picked a number. Now I'd pay a little more attention to the detail, making sure the car's a little more accurate, but back then I didn't care. Well, the local hardware store in town had these little Ertl tractors, and these are the 300s. Well, I decided I would put them on the flat car, but the problem was when they didn't have a cultivator on them, they put them nose to nose, so they could put about 6 or 8 tractors on one flat car. So I thought, okay, well then I'm going to mount the cultivators on them so that I can only have 3 on here. So I scratch built the cultivators out of wire and just brass shapes. I look at it now and I think I must have been out of my mind to do stuff like this. But anyway, I sat down in the basement with my soldering iron, a bending plier, and just bent them around and put them together. And then originally I had used chain to chain them down on the flat car. Well, I had a good friend that I worked with who said, we never used chain. I worked for IH. He said, we use 3-stranded cable because chains disappear. People would steal them. So he said, we used to buy reel after reel after reel of this 3-stranded cable. We'd let the air out of the tires, wrap the cable around, tighten it up with a bar, and then we'd refill the tires with air. And he said, you could play fiddle notes on those wires. They were strapped down so tight on the flat car. So took all the chains off and put the wires on there. But that was a fun little project with those little Ertl tractors. The other problem I had, the hardware store only had 3. So I couldn't get 8 of them. Now, of course, with eBay, you can get all you want. But back then you had, everything was bought locally. There was no eBay. So, but I thought that was a fun project. I took that to Chicago and they had so many people staring at it that they had to put a chair by it because people were just studying the tractors themselves. And I used to work on a farm, so I knew how the cultivators used to work. And they were getting a kick out of that. So they put chairs by it so people could sit and actually study them. So yeah, I guess that's about as much as I can think about as far as the scratch building goes. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I do that somebody might be interested in, but I think that's about it for now. I certainly, when I retire, I'd be happy to do this again, but that's going to be up to you, Jim.
Absolutely. Anytime that you're available, I welcome you back. I mean, you are
that's great.
You and your son both are true craftsmen. I mean, I'm proud to have you and honored that you want to be back. So thank you so much.
Yeah, we're going to start building a layout in this room. I got a 14 by 21 room here, and we're going to start building a layout in here probably this summer. So maybe by next fall, I'll have something up and ready to go here. So.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, listen, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And I certainly want you back. So I'll count on it sometime this fall.
That sounds good.
Both you and your son.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you much.
Thank you. All right. So